Welcome to the Duke Basketball Corner podcast. I'm your host, Adam Comero, and this episode is going to be the Duke recruiting deep dive under K in the Coach K era. This is it was recorded at the same time as a recent news and notes podcast for mid-September. So it is with Joe Gaudio. It was recorded at the same time. I decided to separate it because for this I have recorded a bonus section which is just solo, which is really, really getting in deep. So I was able to have just a fun discussion with Joe, going over the errors and the recruiting factors. But then after the outro, whoever is listening, keep listening after the outro, and I will just go deep, deep, deep on various categories like RSCI rankings, McDonald's All-Americans, Redshirts, guys who reclassify, one and dones, transfers, whether Duke's white guy reputation matched up before the one and done era, and more. So keep listening again after the outro. Because that's when it gets really deep. I know that part is not for everyone. That's why I'm saying it's bonus. And it's for the casual fans. I think you might be more interested in just the discussion, going over the eras and the factors. And that's not an insult to anyone to say casual fans, because most fans are casual. That is absolutely fine to be that way. But for those who want to really nerd out like I do, I mean, I really enjoyed just getting all the context that goes into the recruiting. So either way, whatever you decide to listen to, I appreciate it. If you enjoy the pod, this and any other episode, go to Apple Podcasts, rate and review. It takes 15 seconds at most to do both things. That's how you will help me and others. You will help me kind of promote the pod and help others find it. So if you could do me that favor, I would very much appreciate it. But let's start right off with my conversation, the recruiting conversation with Joe Gaudio. And here we go. And what I did, I went through every single year of Duke's recruiting class since he became coach in 1980, 81, sent it all to Joe. Joe printed it all out and killed a couple trees. If we all run out of oxygen, blame Joe. Or more fairly, blame me, because I'm the crazy person who loves doing this. I've already done the crazy deep dive into the rotations and the scoring every year, and it's like 1,000,000 pages. But that's the weird stuff I love. When I'm interested in the subject, I like knowing as much as possible about it, and it's just fun to go back and look. But we'll talk about the recruiting classes today, and more so the takeaways from each. We're not going to go too in-depth into each class. Coach K, he took over Duke. I mean, Vic Bubas in the 60s, Duke was really, really good. I mean, they made the regional finals, semifinals, finals, semifinals in the early to mid-60s. But then when Bucky Waters took over, they were okay. Neil McGeechee, kind of not so good. And Bill Foster's first 3 years, he was 13-13, 13-14, and then 14-13. So not great. So it's kind of like Coach K. His first couple years wasn't doing too well. But then Foster, he made the final, second round as a 2 seed. Remember, this was during the time when only the ACC champion would actually make the tournament. And the year before K took over, Duke was a 4 seed, made the regional final, and then Bill Foster, I guess, I'm still not positive why, but he left for South Carolina after the season. So Coach K took over a team that really was doing well under Bill Foster, and I believe they had just lost Mike, what's his name? the big center, calls ACC games.
Jaminski?
Yeah, Mike the G-Man. I can't believe I forgot his name. But Mike Jaminski, he had just graduated. But K, he still had Gene Banks, Kenny Denard, Vince Taylor, 3 NBA players. And they went 17-13 that first year. But then came the 10-17 and 11-17 years before he really got himself adjusted. So I think the fact that Bill Foster's first 3 years were kind of mediocre, maybe he was able to look back and see that. And plus, Coach K, he was just learning how to do it. He came from Army. And in terms of recruiting, he even admits in the 1980 recruiting class and 81, he was casting a wide net, just trying to get whoever he could. And, I mean, he actually went for Chris Mullin, didn't get Chris Mullin, and he ended up pretty much with not much. His first 2 seasons, not much. His assistant coaches, Chuck Swenson, Bobby Dwyer, came from West Point. A couple years later, he would add Pete Gaudette and Bob Bender, both of them from West Point as well. So he was using a lot of West Point connections, and everything with them came under Bobby Knight. That's how they learned. So that's what he was doing. He was starting out doing most of the recruiting himself. And let's get into it. The first big recruit, not big recruit, but the first impact recruit was actually Canadian, Dan Meagher. He was a solid role player, nothing major, but he was still starting even when the vaunted 82 class came in. He was still a starter, and Coach K, when Meagher was a senior, he actually showed Danny Ferry clips and said, this is the type of role you're going to be playing, just a lot bigger in terms, and that got Ferry to come to Duke. Ferry was actually, it was between UNC and Duke, and Danny Ferry actually chose Duke, saying Coach K, he could tell, like, Coach K, the way he recruited him, K came with more fire than Dean Smith, whatever that means. But even early on, getting a recruit over Dean Smith, that was pretty cool. And there was a couple of guys K was going for at the same time as, like, Dawkins and Allery, guys like that they chose other places, which allowed K to have kind of, Duke was the school for them. And some of that has to do with luck, but some of recruiting always has to do with luck. But the 82 class, I mean, that is what basically started everything off with Dawkins, Allery, Henderson, Billis. The first guy he signed was actually Weldon Williams. He also signed Bill Jackman, who ended up transferring to Nebraska. But that first class, that was huge. And what I'm going to do is we're going to break this down into eras. I wanted to kind of start it off with a little history, but the eras for each era, we're going to go down. We won't mention everything for each one, but just talk about what affected the success or struggles of each era in terms of rankings / McDonald's All-Americans, because I was trying to find rankings before RSCI started in 1998, and it's tough. So McDonald's All-Americans makes it kind of easier to see the elite recruits. Then another factor, type of error / continuity. Another, assistant coaches. The fourth, recruiting strategy. 5, transfers. 6, redshirts. 7, the unexpected. 8, program reputation. And 9, just simply whether guys work out or don't. So we're not going to go over each one, but just kind of those are some of the factors affecting each group. So I talked about 1980, 1981 casting a wide net. 1982 through 1991. I sent you this huge list, as I said. You killed many a tree by printing this out. Did you have any takeaways? I know we didn't get to actually see these guys live, and most of what we know is just what we read or the very few clips we can watch on YouTube. But is there anything about 1982 to 1991 which immediately stuck out to you?
No, I mean, obviously it was a different era back in the day where these guys would come in and stay for 4 years. And we mentioned, I think we spoke, a lot of it had to do with they just didn't have the opportunity and the money wasn't really there for them to leave. So you're able to build a little more of a team with chemistry and build a team that plays better together, and you're able to pick and choose the positions you want. So you could get a point guard, and you know what positions you'll need based on who's leaving in 4 years. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? So it just made it, I feel like it made it easier to recruit, but it also made it easier to stick to the type of team and nucleus you wanted to build. So that first with Dawkins and Allery and Henderson and Billis and Jackman and Williams, that really was, I think, was integral in the success for Coach K to start off and have a great start to his career. So that kind of was a springboard into different recruiting classes and continuous success. So
Yeah, I mean, just a stat that goes to show, I mean, freshman double-digit scores under K. Dawkins and Allery, they did it in 1983. The next guy to do it was Grant Hill in 1991. So it just shows how important they were. It wasn't just that K was getting them to build the program. It's just they were needed to contribute immediately because there was not much big-time ACC talent on that team already. It was basically Dan Meager and then those four guys, and they were ready and they all worked out. And that's one thing where Coach K's strategy, targeting fewer players at the necessary positions compared to that wide net, it helped him convey how much he wanted each recruit. The downside of that, as we really wouldn't see it till later, is the potential of really few backup options if the recruits don't pan out. The thing during this first decade, though, from 1982 to 1991, they all panned out, or I would say a large percentage of them worked out. And in terms of the type of air continuity, you said it, in terms of there weren't options which allowed them to kind of get more money or jump to the pros. Jay Billis has been quoted on this. It's not like these guys had some strong moral fiber, which they were so devoted to their school and, hey, they agreed to stay 4 years. No, there was just, that's where they were, and that's the option they had. That was the best option. So there was no danger of them leaving. So Kay could just kind of recruit someone who could make an impact or develop in a couple years, and by the time that 82 class graduated or even were upperclassmen, then the development would start to come from the next class, and it would keep going. I mean, Christian Laettner, he's said that they would basically, at a certain point, coach themselves because it's just tradition, and with the system, they would get to know the system. But it all started out with that 1982 class, so I think that was huge, and they were ready to contribute immediately, not just contribute, but at a high level. I think one thing that helped, I mentioned Bill Jackman, but besides that, there was really no transfers. So that continuity was coming. Redshirts, there's really no redshirts, medical or freshman, whatever you want to call it. There was no unexpected. I mean, it just made things, the continuity help so much, and it's what goes on a lot at the mid-majors now, just with a bit of a lesser talent. But there's so many good basketball players all over the world in the current day that are all over the country now, that those mid-majors can still do well if they develop players throughout 4 years. So at a much higher level, Coach K was almost like Duke was like a mid-major program in that time period, developing guys over 4 years. And it worked out pretty well, I would say, because while they might not have been as good in the regular season as the current era teams, they were always ready for March. And, I mean, they had quite a run of Final Fours during that time, which goes to show, I mean, they would be at their strongest around March.
Yep, that's the beauty. And unfortunately, we've struggled a bit in March over the last 10 years, I think, in terms of just not meeting expectations as a Duke fan. But for the most part, I mean, if you have Coach K on your side and he's the one pulling the strings in terms of putting together your team and your roster and your play calling and the style of play, and you're in pretty good hands. So
absolutely. Okay, so, and obviously the success came with it. Moving on to the next era, I would say 1992 to 1996. And to really understand, I said there weren't transfers. There was actually one at the end of that period, which would have mattered. There's actually two. In 1991, there was Crawford Palmer and Billy McCaffrey. And Crawford Palmer, he was a McDonald's All-American. Billy McCaffrey, McDonald's All-American. Billy McCaffrey, in that championship game against Kansas, made as big an impact as anyone. He was a lethal scorer, transferred to Vanderbilt, where he averaged 21, I believe, both years. He was a stud, and you think how those teams developed and the continuity I was saying. when you're so dependent on that continuity and everyone has that set position, you're counting on guys to develop at certain times. I mean, Billy McCaffrey, you put him on the that 93 team, which after Leitner graduated, I believe Brian Davis graduated. I mean, they were in need of some guys to really take over those roles, and Billy McCaffrey could have been huge. And while the NCAA tournament, as you were kind of saying, it's a crapshoot, that game against California, you just wonder how McCaffrey would have done. I mean, he was a really, really elite college player. Crawford Palmer, he was great at Dartmouth, although the Ivy League at that point in time wasn't quite, the talent was a lot lower. But even so, that kind of chink in the armor, I would say, was the Billy McCaffrey transfer, which they hadn't really had to deal with in any way before that. It was just you knew what you were getting each year.
Yep.
So moving on, then, I mean, the 1990 team, Grant Hill, obviously he was ready immediately, and then you knew you were going to have a great roster for the next couple years. So even though, I mean, Antonio Lang, he was a good role player, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the big-time players and then role players to play alongside of them. So he worked out Marty Clark, he at times, and Christian Ast. I mean, he's another transfer, and actually he was before 1991. 1990, he was the second Duke transfer after Bill Jackman. And he actually averaged 20 a game in American, shot 43% from deep. So he's another one who could have made an impact. But still, not many transfers, but I think that was still a wake-up call for heading into the new era. And then 1991, Cherokee Parks. He was a very good big man in a supporting role, but even so, I'm not sure he's someone you could rely on as the go-to guy. So then when you look at some other guys around that time, when you had Eric Meek and Kenny Blakeney as the other recruits there, you had Chris Collins and Tony Moore the next year, Jeff Capel, Greg Newton, Joey Beard, Carmen Wallace. I mean, these are guys, some of them, like Jeff Capel and Chris Collins, they can be solid contributors. But I think Duke was really missing that go-to guy, that elite college player. And I'm looking through here, these role players, they didn't even work out really well. Joey Beard, he transferred. He was the only McDonald's All-American in 1993. So it was a rough time for getting the elite players. And Trajan Langdon was huge in 94. I mean, he came with Ricky Price and Steve Wojo, but Wojo took a couple years. Ricky Price kind of fell off after a couple years. Langdon was big, but you think about the recruiting classes prior to the 94-95 season, it was kind of destined for that team to kind of fall apart because they didn't have, I mean, Cherokee Parks was pretty good, but not a go-to player, and the rest was Trajan Langdon and just guys who really weren't meant for those roles. So that was a rough year, and then you're thinking, oh, they can come back strong, but Trajan Langdon, he had to take a medical redshirt in 1995 when Taman Domzalski and Matt Christensen were coming in. So it's another recruiting class where you get nothing. So in terms of going over just during that time of the unexpected, you get the Trajan Langdon sophomore year redshirt. The recruiting strategy took a couple bumps with the transfers out. The assistant coaches, I think that's what I think really affected things. Although Coach K, he switched from just the Army guys to more of his ex-players. Let's look at who he had during that period. With the assistant coaches, here we go. Amaker came in before the 87-88 season. Mike Bray the year before. So Amaker and Bray, although Bray wasn't an ex-player, he still had an impact, and Jay Billis came in 1989. So we started to get those guys, Quinn Snyder in 92, 93. But even so, I just think those guys weren't recruiting at the level that they had hoped for, and it was just such a difference. I mean, we both don't know, because we weren't around during that time, how much went into the recruiting, but it fell off pretty big from the decade prior. Is there anything you noticed about that decade? I mean, they had Trajan Langdon. He was a big recruit. But other than that, really from like 92 to 95, it was some pretty poor recruiting classes.
Yeah. it was pretty light in terms of, I mean, Cherokee Parks was a good player, but again, not a cornerstone type of player for your roster. Langdon obviously became a star through still one of my personal favorites of all time, but they it just was a lot of role players, a lot of guys they may have thought were gonna turn into different style players, but for the most part, I mean, it just seemed to be a large bunch of good basketball players, but nothing great.
Yeah, and you need that guy who's basically ready from the get-go. I mean, Trajan
Right.
Langdon, he was
From day
pretty good
one.
in his freshman year, but just they almost needed him to dominate immediately, and that wasn't fair for his skill set. But I think a huge recruit, the last part of that era that was big before K changed everything, was getting Rashawn McLeod as a transfer, because he was someone who was really, his first year he was big time, but not quite a go-to guy. But then his senior year, redshirt senior year, for that 90, he was there for 96, 97, 97, 98. I mean, he was amazing. I mean, even in his first year, basically, when he fouled out versus Providence, Derek Brown went off. Duke had nothing. I mean, Duke was just so limited. They were still kind of trying to build back up. I mean, it was Langdon, McLeod. I mean, Capel and Collins did what they could, but still, McLeod really did a good job carrying them, and I would say Langdon played off that. So McLeod will never get enough credit for what he did, in my opinion. But 92, 96, it was rough for getting elite players besides McLeod and Trajan Langdon. The last part of that, they did get Chris Carrawell and Nate James, though. Really good role players, but again, we're talking about guys who can carry a team. Then everything changed. Johnny Dawkins arrived in 1997, and all of a sudden the recruiting picked up. What also changed is that K, he had back surgery, obviously missed the 94-95 season. When he came back, he changed it to all of his ex-players as assistant coaches, along with Tim O'Toole. And he tried to really divvy it up because he was doing so much of the recruiting himself before. So now the assistant coaches came in big, and a guy like Dawkins was huge because he could speak to these kids, maybe like Kay couldn't at times, or another assistant coach on the team. I mean, when Dawkins joined the staff, actually, it was immediately all ex-players. It was him, David Henderson, and Quinn Snyder. Then Wojo joined the next year, and then from 2001 through 2008, Dawkins, Chris Collins, and Wojo. Nate James joined after that. I mean, it was just, you got that continuity, and you got guys who had played under Coach K, who could talk to recruits, really let them know what's expected and everything. And I really think that helped a ton. So immediately, that 97, when he arrived for the 97-98 season, they got a ton. Let me look at the 97 class, and it stands out so much more than before. Yeah, you got Brand, you got Battier, and you got Avery. You also got Chris Burgess, who was considered a good recruit, but after 2 years and getting overtaken by Brand his first year, he transferred to Utah. But, I mean, there's certain guys who they step on the court, and you can immediately tell those are difference makers. Brand, Battier, and William Avery, I mean, immediately. You put them on the court, and these aren't guys they're feeling their way. They were ready to contribute right away. So I think that's something that Duke was missing at a time when they just didn't have really, I don't know, understandably the patience to be able to have everyone develop over 4 years. They needed guys who could contribute immediately. So that 97 class, it was comparable in a way to the 1982 class in terms of the sheer talent coming in ready to contribute.
Yeah, that 97 recruiting class definitely made a huge difference. I mean, you're talking William Avery was very good as well, but we're talking Brand and Battier, who are two of the ultimate greats to ever play at Duke and play together. So when they both came to the team, it just, I don't know, you could just tell it was just you just had different type of talent on the court. I mean, it was just very, very, very obvious.
Yeah, and just like that 1982 or the 1983 squad, which came from the 1982 recruits, there was really no other guys who made up the squad. It was, they were so thin, and it got to the point where, I still wonder what Coach K was thinking in that '99 championship game, because 1998 they got Maggette. He was really the only recruit, and he was the sixth man, and he only played a couple minutes. Besides that, it was just all the starters. He put so much trust into that '97 class, along with Nate James and Chris Carewell. Those guys were huge. They were absolutely huge. All right, so the next era comes 1997. No, I said 1997 to 2004. But so let's go from all right. So next we get to the 1999 class. You could argue before the one and done era, it was Duke's second best class ever, behind the 1982 class. Jay Williams, Carlos Boozer, Mike Dunleavy, and also Nick Horvath. He was unranked, but also 1998. That's when you start the RSCI rankings. It's easier to see where these guys were ranked in high school, so you can see how they were. And Maggette was number 16, but you got Jay Williams number 3, Boozer 8, Casey Sanders was 16, didn't quite work out, but Dunleavy 26, and they just, all of them almost played above their ranking. And that's really rare. And Jay Williams ranked number 3, playing above the ranking. That shows how good he did. And again, immediately ready to contribute. That 2000 team, no depth. So I think when K needed to load up, he did it pretty well. And then after that, you could kind of the same way the early 80s, after the 1982 class, he just got Duhon in 2000, Daniel Ewing 2001. And then he was ready to re-up again with Reddick, Sheldon, Sean Dockery in 2002. So I think it was just that 1999 class, one of the best ever as well. Definitely a top 5K recruiting class. And, that'll go down in history. Jay Williams, Boozer, and Dunleavy, those weren't just good college players. They were not just great college players. They were great NBA players.
Yep, and here you go. That's a championship recruiting class right there. That's the main thing. Those are champions right there. Those are players who came to Duke with huge and high expectations and delivered on those expectations. So, as good as this last Duke recruiting class was, as good as a couple of the other recruiting classes were, this has to rank ahead of them, in my opinion, because they did what the others didn't do. They hung a banner in Duke.
Absolutely. You're still dealing with occasional guys like Michael Thompson. He didn't work out. He was a number 30 recruit, McDonald's All-American. He transferred after a year. Then you have Shavlik Randolph, who he left after 3 years. He had a rough injury-plagued career at Duke, but they were hoping for a bit more. But they could survive guys not working out or leaving before they expected, just because, again, there's the continuity. Especially with the 99 class, Jay Will, Boozer, and Dunleavy each staying for 3 years. That's kind of unbelievable at a time when guys were starting to leave. So then you get to the 2003 class, and you have Luol Deng, amazing. He was, as a freshman, ready to contribute right away, not just contribute, but was huge. But he left after a year. I don't know if they could have seen that coming. Also, Chris Humphreys, that was the same year. He agreed to come to Duke, but Coach K, from what I've heard, wouldn't promise him the immediate role of being like a go-to player. So he decided to take himself to Minnesota. So a guy like Chris Humphreys, the number 10 recruit in the class, all of a sudden you thought you had him, you don't. Then the next year, you get a guy so you got nothing from the class going into the following year. Luol Deng left early, and Chris Humphreys you never really had. So you get DeMarcus Nelson, David McClure, and then you think, oh, Sean Livingston. He's crazy talented, number 2 recruit in the class. Nope. All of a sudden, the word starts to get out that, hey, he could be drafted really high if he decides to just go to the NBA. He goes to the NBA. So while DeMarcus Nelson was a solid player, again, you're kind of looking at a team without go-to players. So you go to 2005 through 2009. That's the next era. Coach K is away during summers with the national team. Do you think that affected things in terms of recruits?
Looking at the recruits, I would venture to guess probably so. We've had a couple of really good players individually in those classes, but no class that really had multiple difference makers in it. So you look at the 2005 class where, DeMarcus Nelson was a good player. DeMarcus Nelson was, at one point was a leading scorer in the state of California, which I'm sure there's been some talent that's come out of that state before. So you look at, Josh McRoberts is the number one overall recruit. I didn't see it. Greg Paulus, Boateng, Pocius, and Boykin, who obviously ended up leaving, and I believe he went to Cal. That's where he went, right? He went to California.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just no real huge difference maker at all in that draft, in that recruiting class. Then you go to the next recruiting class. In 2006, you get Gerald Henderson. Was, good at Duke. Shire was obviously a great Duke player. So, but still no stars at all. No superstar type players. Guys eventually turned into good players, but no superstar. The only one you could venture to maybe call a superstar out of that actual era that we're talking about, is maybe Nolan would be considered a superstar at that aspect, but Singler and Shire, them three together were great together, but I don't know. I think it made a huge difference because I think the majority of his focus was more on the USA than it was, in his own backyard recruiting.
It somehow worked out with Shire, Singler, Smith, and Henderson. Those four, they really were the core because
it's because they stayed. They stayed.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is just looking at those years before where guys left early or all of a sudden changed their mind. I think Kay wanted continuity. And there's a certain type of guy who, when you recruit, you kind of have a feeling based on their history or whatever else that they might stay. And I'm not saying that he went more for. It's just interesting because when you look at the stats don't lie. And in terms of from 1998 through 2004, RSCI top 100 recruits. There was 12 black guys and 3 white guys. It was Dunleavy, Reddick, and Shavik Randolph. From 2005 to 2009, top 100 recruits, it was 6 black guys and 11 white guys. And I'm not saying there is cause to effect, but there is something to the stories of there were certain guys who turned Duke down around that time because they weren't comfortable with the way the team was assembled and certain guys they didn't like. And just it's unfortunate based on socioeconomic. You look, just in general, a white guy is more likely to stay. I'm not saying that's the case with everyone. I'm not even going into that shady area. But I am just saying there's certain guys that they got who maybe Coach K thought had a better chance of staying than other guys because of 1998. Elton Brand was great, stayed 2 years, and there's no way in hell he should have stayed more than that. He was the number one pick. And we've talked ourselves about there was a letter a Duke student wrote to Elton Brand that was very uncalled for. Anyone who's wondering about that, Google it. And it was just Kay was adjusting to kids leaving early. So maybe he wanted guys who just were willing to stay. But either way, it makes it so that some of the top tier talent was turning him down. I said 2005 and 2009. He missed out on 2006, Brandon Wright. 2007, Patrick Patterson, though it was kind of between Patterson and Singler at that point. So they got Singler. They made out quite well. But in 2009, John Wall and Kenny Boynton. They missed out on those guys, and those are some guys who you just wonder what kind of difference they would have made. And this is very elitist because we're looking at those teams, and even though the 2007 team, they lost first round to VCU, after that, they did remarkably well considering everything. Like I said, those 4 players who carried them, those are huge. Shire was one of the few players for Duke who was able to average big points immediately. But, you look at, like, 2008, that season, 2008, 2009. Elliot Williams exploded at the end. Then he leaves. He goes to take care of his sick mother, and he transfers to Memphis. He would have been huge. The year before, you had Taylor King. Before that, Jamal Boykin, Eric Boateng. And Oleg Chiz. Oleg Chiz, I guess it depends whether you want to count him 2009 or 2010. But either way, these are guys that were expected to make an impact, and they left. Especially like an Elliot Williams. So the fact that they were able to kind of Gerald helped carry them to the 2009-2010 season, but it was pretty much, Nolan, Shire, and Singler. You look at their points in that 2009-10 season, and what they got. Lance Thomas was great as a supporter, and Zubek, he had been injured pretty much for 3 straight years. He was finally able to come on strong. But a guy like Zubek, even though everyone's happy how it turned out, you're expecting more from a guy like that. Well, let's see, what was Zubek? Zubek was the number 25 recruit. Lance Thomas, he was great. I don't think he averaged more than 5 points for Duke. Zubek, yeah, he finished out great. We're really happy that everything worked out. He didn't quite live up to standards either. So I think we remember him so fondly because the team did well, and that's understandably. And they were great teammates. But you got to have those guys who will carry them, and I think Duke was just really fortunate with how it turned out with Shire, Henderson, Singler, and Nolan Smith, because they didn't get what they were hoping for with many of the other guys.
You're right, and the Zubeks and players like that were obviously a huge part of that national title team in 2010. But you look at just taking a look at it, and you mentioned, Coach K was going after specific players that would stay. So you look at Shire, you look at Singler, you look at Lance, you look at who am I missing there? Lance, Shire, you're missing and Nolan. You're talking guys that are good basketball players, but none of them are elite athletic talents. Like, you can just tell that the majority of the prospects you see go really high in these NBA drafts, the Zaire Smiths and stuff, players that went last year that have a lot of work to do in terms of basketball talent, but they're off the charts athletically. And those guys weren't that type of player. They just they were just good basketball players with good basketball minds. And the NBA is more of a flashy type of league, and those guys weren't those types. So we got lucky to have all 3 of those guys stick around for 4 years, because you could tell that with just their their continuity together and the way they played together and the way they, loved each other and played together as a unit, them staying 4 years is a huge reason why our program was so successful during that period. So,
yeah, one of the best recruiting efforts probably ever was Johnny Dawkins actually convincing Nolan Smith to stay at Duke after his sophomore year, because Dawkins left for Stanford and Nolan Smith wanted to come with him. And Dawkins said, no, you made a commitment to Duke, stay at Duke. And it really worked out. And
thank you, Dawkins.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Another guy who had a rough personal time during his Duke career, but, always credit to him. Andre Dawkins, he reclassified to come for the 2009-2010 season. Those 2 shots, 2 threes he hit against, I believe it was Baylor in the Elite Eight. No 2 shots bigger. So, there's guys who they understand their role and they play it to the best of their abilities. But the main guys, they were huge. But in terms of who they lost out on, that goes back to one of the factors I was talking about in terms of reputation. At that point in time, Duke, I think, they did have, Jay Will, those classes where everyone was there kind of in a chunk, with like Brand, Maggette, and then Jay Will, Dunleavy, and Boozer. I mean, they worked out really well in the NBA, but in other classes, it was still Coach K would get guys for his system, and they developed a reputation as Duke didn't have good NBA players, which had been going on for a while. Dawkins was okay, but and Grant Hill, even despite his injury history, could have been a legend, was still very good. But besides that, a lot of players who were great college players didn't work out. Even a guy like Danny Ferry, who was huge in college, didn't quite work out the way some might have thought. So you get these guys like a John Wall, who knows he's an NBA player right away, turning down Duke for Kentucky with Calipari, who embraced the one and done right away. Whereas Coach K, even when he was coaching the Olympics, he didn't do that. I think what was the one and done? They said that before about the 96-97 season or 97-98, or I'm sorry, 2006-2007 or 2007-2008. And Coach K, I mean, he made efforts, but he lost out on those guys who had that one and done potential. Even like I think he went for Greg Monroe in 2008 as well. One thing I think it was great is for them to get Seth Curry, because they got him to transfer. And he was ready he was on the championship team, but ready for the 2011 season. But that's when we start the tiny era of 2010 through 2012, because that's when Jeff Capel came. Jeff Capel, he was big time recruiting at Oklahoma. There were some issues there, but I mean, he got a guy like Blake Griffin, and that's when they got Kyrie Irving and Austin Rivers. So there was a willingness, an ability to get a one and done. Plus, basically, Rodney Hood, he was considered a transfer one and done, if you want to call that. So Jeff Capel, he did a better job. I don't know if it was him or just Duke in general, but either way, they were able to show they could lock down a one and done type.
And boy, has it changed completely to where they've surely shown the ability to lock down the one and dones now, because the majority of the classes we're getting are, so you see how it progressed through the years. He had a specific type of player he liked from in a certain era. Didn't go well, so he changed to another type of era and saw with like Singler and those guys that went well. But then you just saw the game changing. The game just completely was shifting to a faster paced game and a positionless basketball game and stuff like that, to where these elite prospects were dominating at the college level, like dominating. Kentucky had, when they had Wall and they had Rose and they had they were flat out dominating. So they had no choice. I mean, Duke had no choice. Instead of, as much as I love the Matt Joneses of the world and the Rashid Suleimans, and you have to, if you're playing a team that has 4 top 15 recruits that are guaranteed stars in the NBA, you have to be willing to make a change and not let the game pass you by. And I think Coach K may have took a little longer than I wanted him to take to make that move, but unfortunately, I don't know. I'm starting to wonder if it should go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, with Kyrie and Austin Rivers, I mean, it was great that they got him, but still, those two kids, even, I don't know if it really changed anyone's mind in terms of certain recruits choosing Duke. And I mean, even so, I mean, Austin Rivers, he didn't have much around him. He gets a lot of the blame, which is undeserved for that Duke team. They just had no one else who could create off the dribble. Guys like Ryan Kelly and Mason Plumlee, they just took a little bit to develop. So they had kind of come into their own after he had left, and he got some blame for that. And it really wasn't his fault. He did as best as he could. But then the next year, the recruit which changed everything was Jabari Parker, because he's the type of guy Duke just didn't get. The type of guy, he was from Chicago, and man, you get a guy from Chicago, that opened up everything. I think the impact of Jabari goes pretty under the radar, and that's why I have him in an era all by himself. I had 2010 to 2002, and then 2013 is just one era. After that, 2014 and now, that's when basically the guy, it wasn't just like you try to mix a one and done in with the rest. It was, these kids are basically recruiting themselves. They would recruit their friends. I mean, even that first year of the 2014 and now, you had Jahlil Okafor and Tyus Jones, who were best friends. Then they recruited Justice Winslow themselves. They basically got Winslow to come to Duke themselves, and that's what's been going on ever since. These recruits, with social media and everything, they do. I'm not saying the Duke coaches don't do work. They deserve tons of credit. But these players, I mean, it's really big in terms of getting multiple elite recruits to your school at once, and that was big for how it's been. You have. You go over the one and dones. Let's see here. You had Corey Maggette, 99, Luol Deng, 2004. Then you had Kyrie in 11, Austin Rivers, 2012, Jabari Parker in 2014. After that, you had Jahlil Okafor, Tyus Jones, Winslow in 15, Brandon Ingram in 16, and you have 10 one and dones in the last 3 years. So you have 11, 12, you have 14 in the last 5 years. When you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total in Coach K's previous 35 years. So it just shows how much has changed. And it just shows how basically guys like before Coach K would recruit for certain positions, now it's just, he won't get multiple in the same year, although now there's positionless basketball. But even so, if you don't prove yourself immediately as a high recruit, you'll get recruited over. Immediately. So you better prove yourself right away, which is why some guys who you think they might have it might have been in their best interest to stay another year. K's going to replace them with someone else. So it's really pointless. Why would you stay? They barely get any playing time. Guys who have been more than bit role players who stayed over a year since in the 2014 to current era, you have Grayson, obviously, who stayed 4 years.
Right.
You have Kennard, who stayed 2. Bolden, who stayed 3, and Trey's 2+. So besides that, you're counting, anybody who stays more than a year, you're kind of surprised at. Because if you, no matter what happens, even if it's a Trevon Duval or a Derek Thornton, they know they're going to be recruited over. So for those who say, oh, they should stay anyway, you got to think what's in their best interest. It's beyond whether they are good enough or not. It's just you got to look out for yourself. And with K changing the way he recruited, you just gotta know it's in your own best interest to leave somewhere else. That's why, while it's disappointing that Jordan Tucker left, he left so early. It was probably smart. He realized right away he wasn't going to play. So let's go to Butler. He was actually able to play at Butler before he would have if he had stayed his entire freshman year. So that was smart. It's just right away. He went to Duke, gave his best effort, wasn't able to crack the rotation, and left. So that's kind of how it is. So in terms of the 2014 to current, how do you feel about this type of era?
It's definitely a different type of era, different change of pace than what we were used to. You would be able to grow with a recruiting class almost and enjoy and get your fan favorites and get your favorite players and not get to know them as people, because obviously we don't get that close of an exposure to them, but just understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and just know, as a coach myself, the longer I have a player, the more comfortable I am with that player. Whether it's based on a skill set or knowing what his strengths are, his weaknesses are, and able to build, the rapport for the team and stuff. So while the one and done era is very interesting and you get to see the most talented players that you can imagine, watching them play, you have to find that right rapport. And obviously, very rare do you see a team like the 2015 team that Duke had that had a bunch of young players and still was able to, completely win a championship. But it's just a different era, and it's frustrating because you feel once you start, by the end of the year, they're not freshmen anymore. You hear that all the time. They're not freshmen anymore. They're juniors, or they're like juniors and seniors at that point because they've played so much. but you'd like to see them just maybe stick around a little longer and play together. But I just, the way the era is now, I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, and I mean, there's newer, younger Duke fans who can't even imagine the type of era that we grew up with where guys did stay, and it was assumed that most, if not all, would stay. Let me ask you, how do you feel about the term brotherhood? That's obviously big time with Duke recruits now, started by, I believe it was started by Quinn Cook? I know he started banner hunting. Was it started by Quinn Cook also, the brotherhood?
That I'm not sure. I remember when he was talking about banner hunters and stuff like that. Like, he definitely was the banner hunting. He started that, but I I just feel like you have to be somewhere longer than 1 year to be part of a brotherhood.
I agree, and to respond to what you first said about wanting to know people more, wanting to get to know these players more than a year, there's a reason why. I mean, we went down our top 10 Dukies, or I'm not top Dukies, favorite Dukies. There's a reason most of them. I mean, there's a lot I named, a guy like Matt Jones, guys like that, where yeah, they're 4 years. They may not be the stars, and it doesn't mean I don't understand. I mean, I made a big point of saying you have to have the stars in order to really succeed as a team. But even so, I really love the other guys because you would get to know them more. You would get to see them grow. And in terms of the brotherhood, I think it's very interesting how that came about because I really do feel that came when Coach K was coaching the national team, and he really emphasized to LeBron and everyone the way things can be branded, the way individuals can be branded, and that's huge now with athletes. Their branding and how they kind of go about money making and just how people see them, all that type of stuff. I think the brotherhood refers almost more to the fact of that type of branding more than actually on the court, although I'm not trying to take away from chemistry that they develop on the court. But at the same time, I mean, you got these guys who are in and out. So it's really tough to call it a brotherhood when it's more about what I feel Duke can do for them. The exposure, as you were saying before, there's so much national attention on them. All their games are going to be on national TV. You're surrounded by the most expensive equipment. You're basically being trained in NBA facilities. Coach K has NBA connections everywhere. A lot of guys who played under him are in the NBA or have NBA positions. So I think the brotherhood has a lot to do with that stuff as much as actually it does basketball. The thing that I find interesting now is how recruiting is followed and how like kind of the drama of like, oh, this guy said he's narrowed his list down to this. This guy's sisters, dogs, friends, housekeepers, pet salamander said that he's into Duke. Like, it's very interesting. It's like it's almost like a rumor mill, and I'm not into that. So I know in the past years I've mentioned plenty that I don't care about recruiting. But when a guy declares for Duke, yeah, I'm absolutely all into it. But in terms of recruiting, I think a lot of people are into that as much as the actual games. That's fascinating to me.
I I try to stay away from the whole he said, she said. Is this guy coming to Duke? Is this guy, is he leaning toward this school or looking at the crystal ball or whatever the stuff is that you can do? I'm more interested in who's on the team and how the team has to get better to get to where they want to get to. So I think for me, and this is just my personal opinion on the whole matter, is we're so spoiled as Duke fans that if a team doesn't win a championship, it's deemed a failure. So that's how good of teams we've had in the past. That's how good of teams we're expecting every year we go into the year. And a lot of it is hype. A lot of it is social media hype and ESPN. But the thing for me is when you mentioned your top list of players, like my favorite players of all time are players that have stuck around. You know, a couple of them are different. Zion was different. He just was a different kind of person. Like, you look at Zion, you could just tell he's a different kind of person. But for the most part, my favorite players are the JJs. I was a huge Singler fan, loved Singler. Guys like Nolan and Shire, those guys are the guys who stuck around and truly seemed to play for that name on the front of their jersey a little more than others, maybe.
Last 2 points I want to make, or not points, but there is an interesting factor of regional, because I know Billis was from the West Coast. And I mentioned Bill Jackman. He transferred. He was from Nebraska. I think he transferred back to Nebraska after a season. I don't quite know who was from the West Coast from that point on until DeMarcus Nelson. DeMarcus Nelson obviously worked out. After that, though, it's interesting. There was actually 5 of the next 6 guys they got from the West Coast ended up transferring. That was let me find the list here. It was I know it was Jamal Boykin. It was
Taylor King.
Yeah, Jamal Boykin, Taylor King, Derek Thornton, Chase Jeter,
and Oleg
Chiz. And the one who did stay was great, Kyle Singler. But it's just really interesting. And I mean, then the next one after that, I believe, was Bagley. And I mean, there's no chance he was transferring. But I mean, it just goes to like one of the factors I was talking about, the unexpected. I mean, these are still human beings. They're still kids. I mean, there's plenty of, I shouldn't call them kids, young adults who go to college far away. They don't like it, and so they come closer to home. They transfer to college closer to home. Basketball players are no different, especially when they've been kind of top dogs in high school. Then they go far away from where they grew up, and they're not succeeding like they're used to. They might want to come home sooner than others. So it's just things that you can't predict as easily. They've always gotten some of the best players. Now it's just in a different way. The development process in a different way. And I think Jeff Capel, Johnny Dawkins in 1998, and Jeff Capel coming in, I believe, 2010 or 2011, those two assistants helped change recruiting more than anything. So it's a process that involves everyone adapting to different times. You could say Coach K's USA experience helped a couple years after you might have thought, but still helped nonetheless in terms of the way guys are able to be branded now, the one and dones. But even so, we miss the guys who stayed longer, but appreciate those who come, who are just crazy talented, who we're lucky to watch anyway. So, do you have any last comments about the recruiting? Is there any factor you think deserves to be mentioned more, or anything you think deserves to be brought up, a recruit that deserves to be brought up, something that didn't work out, anything you got on your mind?
You know, there's obviously some stuff that sticks out over, you know, the course of the whole shift in paradigm and all that of the whole recruiting. So in the era, I remember watching Duke basketball and feeling more like intertwined with the team during the eras where we had guys that were there for multiple years. Now it's just a matter of it feels like it's game to game. It's not. I feel like they're not building anything for the future because everything is in the current. So it's like, okay, you know, we struggled a little this year. Maybe we got bounced a little early in the tournament. But next year we should come back stronger. We have a good nucleus coming in. Unfortunately, it's just constant turnover. So, you know, we've had some classes where, and I know you mentioned that he took a lot of the blame and that he shouldn't take the blame. But I personally think with those teams that we had that year, I think Rivers was a huge reason why we weren't good. I struggled with a couple of the guys we brought in. The Kyrie, unfortunately, didn't work because of injury, but there was a couple of guys that came. We brought in the year we had Parker, the year we brought in Rodney Hood. Like, those guys just they just seem to wilt in the big moment. And those guys were great talents, but unfortunately those were a couple of the ones that didn't work out in my opinion. So, I think we have to begin to find a better balance of who's going to stay for a little bit and mix them in with some of these top tier talents and hope that it aligns up better, because it's grabbing 5 young kids, shuffling in 5 new young kids. It's not working right now. So
yeah, I actually wrote a big feature breaking down the one and done era and how to succeed during it. That was written in the preseason before the 2014-15 season, and a lot's changed since then, but most of it still applies. If anyone wants me to send that to them, just email dukebasketballcorner@gmail. I will send that to you. But yeah, I mean, you need that good blend, that good mix. So I guess one thing, it was 2022 where it's supposed to go back to guys can go straight from
right.
high school to pro. So I mean, that might change a bunch in terms of how they recruit. I wouldn't mind it. It's great to see all these fantastic players, but I wouldn't mind seeing more of a more continuity involved there.
I agree. I mean, you look at the teams. You look at the last couple teams that have won championships. Just look at a couple of them. So you have Villanova, who had upperclassmen. You had Virginia last year, who had upperclassmen with Kyle Guy and players like, obviously you had your DeAndre Hunter in there, who was just a stud. But you have to have a team that is able to play together. You have to have great guard play, but you have to have a team that plays well together, because in the tournament, it's just a different animal. You're not playing opponents that you have all the analytics and all the tape on, that like you're playing a bunch of teams that's literally who plays the better game and who is able to adapt and better guard play. And when you have senior leadership, it's almost priceless.
Would you be able to guess, there has been one ACC player of the year under K who is not a McDonald's All-American? Do you know who that is?
One player, say that again?
One player under K who is ACC player of the year, and he was not a McDonald's All-American.
Ooh, can you give me a...
He won it in 2000.
2000.
Coming up empty?
I can't...
My guy, yeah. Chris Carrawell.
Was it?
Yep.
No kidding. Yeah, that's...
I mean, it's like I was saying, you got to have the dominant guys, and it's tough to say, you got to have those guys who can be dominant. Chris Carrawell wasn't, so he's one of the rare ones. I mean, and so for me to go up and down this list and saying you got to have guys who can just really take over a game, but then those guys are going to likely be leaving after a year, it's almost kind of being hypocritical by me. So it's tough. It's a tough matter of trying to find that happy medium. But, I mean, in college All-Americans under K who weren't McDonald's All-Americans, you got Mark Allery, Chris Carrawell, Sheldon Williams, and like I said, Sheldon was injured, Rashawn McLeod, Dante Jones, and Seth Curry. So basically most of those were just transfers who Duke ended up getting, but they weren't highly recruited before. So, I mean, most of your top players on a team like Duke are going to be McDonald's All-Americans. So if you're going to continue to want those types of guys, they don't stay like they did earlier. So it's an interesting kind of thing to go through in terms of recruiting.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so to close this out, what I thought we'd do, just to kind of, I don't want us to ever sound like robots. I always hate anything having to do with the term brand, your brand, or anything like that, or even content. I feel like it gets pretty impersonal. So I wanted to at least do something which allows us to kind of humanize ourselves a little more. Hopefully just everything we do is able to do that. But we're going to start something called the Closing 180, where at the end of pods, we each mention whatever we're currently enjoying or interested in at the moment or looking forward to. Could be personal, music, movies, book, person, whatever. Anything you want. But the 180 is 180 degrees opposite of what the rest of the pod is about, which is about Duke basketball and just basketball in general. So it can even be a one-subject rant if you wanted to. It's just a platform of whatever we want to recommend. So I talked to Joe before this, and again, this isn't preaching. It's not anything like that. It's just something which is fun and allows us to kind of get a little bit of our personality out there. So I'll start us off. And one thing I was hoping to do, the reason I started this podcast out is Comoros Corner. Everything was under the Comoros Corner umbrella, and I called this the Comoros Corner Duke Basketball Podcast, was because I wanted to do other subjects. And one of my favorites is music. I mean, music I'm obsessed with more than sports, I would say. So let me start out with, let me try to find these. Here it is. Albums I've been listening to recently that I'll recommend. And I'm not going to go anywhere near in depth into any of this. It's just something I'll write it down on the podcast description. And if you want more of these, I could easily recommend more each time. I'm into pretty much every type of genre. So I will say indie rock. The Carriers. Now is the time for Loving Me, Yourself, and Everyone Else. It's an album by the Carriers. Reminds me a lot of the War on Drugs, if you like that type of music. Melty Hermit. That Hermitage 3, Amidst the Flames of Love. It's kind of what I would deem progressive instrumental beat making. It's beats, but it's like incredibly out there and really, really smart. Goose, that's a band live at the Peachtree Music Festival. Live at Peach Music Festival. They're a jam band. I think they could be carrying the jam band torch for a while to come, decades. Stick Figure, World on Fire. Not as many reggae bands as there used to be. Love me some reggae. Stick Figure, World on Fire, highly recommended. Rashawn Ahmad, The Sun. He is a fantastic rapper and a lot of world beat influence in his most recent album, Rashawn Ahmad, The Sun. Upcoming albums, His Golden Messenger, kind of Roots. That's going to be an amazing album. I think it comes out in a week. Another one coming out in a week, Khan. K period, A period, A period, N period, stands for Knowledge Above All Nonsense, rapper from Maryland. He's amazing, doesn't really do much promo himself, which is, I respect it to get the grassroots thing going, but at the same time, I wish he would do more promo because he deserves it. So check those out that are coming up soon. The only other things, the Between Two Ferns movie. I love Scott Aukerman and everything on the Earwolf podcast. Many know that for Zach Galifianakis, and rightly so. Between Two Ferns, Scott Aukerman wrote the whole thing, directed it. I'm almost more into it for that because I know it's just going to be funny. And another thing on Earwolf, the Womp It Up podcast, it's two crazy women. They say it's, and it's just, I can't even explain it unless you listen to it. They say it's going to be back for the fall with a new season. Womp It Up. I will write all these down. Those are both ridiculous comedies, the Between Two Ferns movie and Womp It Up podcast. So those are my recommendations. That's my 180, which probably went a little bit above 180, but go for it, Joe.
Okay, so yeah, to piggyback off that, I'm a big music fan and everything as well, but I'm always interested in trying to find some new type of music that something different than I'm used to hearing. So, but mine's going to be a little different. I'm going to do something a little more personal. My whole thing is the last couple weeks have been very, very different for me in terms of in parent life. So I have a child now who is going to school. So my thing now is just to everybody out there, just to enjoy, although we're able to do stuff we enjoy and things we love, and make sure to take a step back and realize the great things that are going on around us, and just be thankful for all that stuff going on, and know that there's a lot to life. There's a lot more to life. I'm not trying to sound philosophical or anything like that, but just understanding that we're lucky to be able to do what we do on a daily basis, and to have the people in our families and in our lives that we have. And I'm just blessed and very thankful to be a part of what we're able to do together, but also just have things in my life to keep me motivated and keep me grounded as a person, and always trying to be better as a person. So I try to be the best, father, teacher. I've mentioned that in the past, husband, that I can be. And it's just great to have, things going around us that we can look forward to, but also, where we can make a mark in our life. And it's just great to have, a family and to see my daughter evolve and see stuff like that is one of the main thing in this world that I'm grateful for. So I just, I'm a emotional guy. I get fired up in the moment. I'm a competitive guy, but at the end of the day, I have my daughter putting my hair in pigtails yesterday. So, you just take a step back, realize, what's important and just be thankful for what you got. I'm not trying to be philosophical or be preach to you, but there's, with 9/11 passing and all this stuff, there's a lot of families and a lot of people who've hit some hard times. So, I think if I'm speaking for both of us, I think we're both pretty lucky to be able to do what we do.
Valid words, important words, and well said. Very well said. Okay, so again, that sometimes might be recommendations, sometimes just personal thoughts, sometimes rants, just anything that allows us each to have a little bit of a platform each week. And me and Joe both went totally different directions, and that's great. That's fine. And like I said, closing 180, just anything that's not Duke college basketball or college basketball in general, just to let you get to know us a little bit more. However that comes about is great. All right, so we'll be back soon with, season's getting really close now, and there'll be something, hopefully, nothing set in stone, but where we do rotations, minutes distributions, maybe another one with positions, like point guards under K, bigs under K, and then kind of team elements. And then after that, we'll be good to go. It'll be season time, and like I said, I've already started watching. So, Joe, thanks so much for joining me again, and I will be back with everyone very soon. I appreciate everyone listening to the Duke Basketball Corner podcast. I am Adam Comer.
Ladies, gents, one thing remains. Get ready for the entertainment.
What's going on, guys? Adam Comer here with some bonus material for the Duke Basketball Corner podcast. And if you stuck with me, that means you listened to the conversation I had with Joe Gaudio just about recruiting in general and the different eras and periods and factors that go into recruiting. Now, what I want to do is add some context, because I want this to stand alone. I want there to be tons of information that you can come back to and see, because there's really not much out there in terms of just facts about recruiting overall, and it's just in terms of the specifics. So what I want to do is I want to go into now just a lot of rankings and just different categories of like walk-ons, interesting walk-ons. I feel like McDonald's All-Americans, Redshirts, guys who reclassify, one and dones, transfers, whether Duke's white guy reputation matched up before the one and dones, and just a ton of stuff like that. Some of it's going to be kind of listing, some of it deserves explanation, some of it is fun, and I think it's just it's cool to do this, just to have it always there. So, hey, let's just get it on right now. I'm not going to spend too much time on each category because I don't want this to be a complete marathon. So let's just get right down to it. All right, one thing I did want to clarify first. I mentioned how K's goal in recruiting fewer guys was and is to convey to the recruits how much he wants them. And I said it works as long as the recruits panned out. I think what a better way of saying that, what I meant to say, is it's not about them working out, although obviously you want them to. It's that if you don't target many guys, then if your target picks a different school, what? What's the backup plan? So I think that was more of what I was trying to say right there. All right, so the reason I like RSCI is the same reason I like bracket matrix. They're just aggregates that collect and show data from a bunch of different sources and then come up with the average. Bracket matrix, that's when the NCAA tournament selection is coming up and they just collect the predictions from everyone who does it and they just come up with the average. Like aggregates, I feel like those are bad things in many aspects of life, like news and all that stuff. But for this, for NCAA tournament selection and for recruiting, yeah, I have no devotion. So I just want to know the average in general. So that's why I like those. I mean, when I look at the McDonald's All-American list, and I don't see guys like Mark Allery, Kevin Strickland, Antonio Lang, Jeff Capel, Eric Meek, and those guys are on the Parade All-American team, I don't know, it brings up questions. So, I mean, I searched for Antonio Lang, and I see he's a top 25 recruit. So I don't know. I mean, just like everything else with recruiting rankings and awards and kind of those all-star games, just take it with a grain of salt because, I mean, RSCI begins in 1998. So before that, it's kind of a crapshoot. So it was kind of the wild, wild west out there. And there was no AAU during the 80s as well. So that had a big effect on everything. I'm not sure exactly when AAU started or at least became more widespread. But it's obviously harder to rank and choose when you just don't get to see the prospects as much, the recruits as much. So the McDonald's All-Americans, by decade, the 1980s, Duke had 12, 1990s, Duke had 17, 2000s, 20, 2010s, 28. Obviously, more McDonald's All-Americans because you got to reload now. You can't. There's not as much growth and development. It's just kind of the turnover is much greater. I mean, there's even some guys who reclassify at the last minute who they weren't McDonald's All-Americans, although they would have been. I mean, like Marvin Bagley, Derek Thornton, Andre Dawkins, even possibly Alex Murphy. They all reclassified. And guys who were injured, Harry Giles, Chris Carrawell, and Sheldon Williams. I mean, those guys definitely would have been named McDonald's All-Americans, but they were injured, so no go. There was 4 different seasons when Duke had 4 McDonald's All-Americans: 1999, 2002, 2014, and 2018. In 1999, let's see who that was: the Jay Will, Carlos Boozer, Mike Dunleavy, and Casey Sanders. So 3 huge recruits. Casey Sanders was also a very high recruit. Casey Sanders, I got to give him credit. I mean, when Carlos Boozer, when he hurt his foot, Casey Sanders, he put in minutes. He was never the most talented guy, but a big body, and he gave him some solid minutes in 2001 and helped him to that championship. Let's see here. And then there was 9 times. They had 3 McDonald's All-Americans in 9 different seasons. It's crazy. And a lot of them are recent. So let's see. They've had 19 All-Americans the last 6 years, 2014 through 2019. And keep in mind, again, that's with no Bagley, Thornton, Giles. That's crazy. I think I mentioned this on the discussion. The only ACC player of the year under K who was not an All-American was Chris Carrawell. But again, he was injured when they did the McDonald's All-American team. So I would think he likely would have made it, but it's still interesting just that fact. College All-Americans who weren't McDonald's All-Americans. You got Mark Allery, another one who he made parade, but not McDonald's. Chris Carrawell, Sheldon Williams, again injured. And then Rashawn McLeod, Dante Jones, and Seth Curry, who were all transfers, who you could possibly argue, or it's not possibly, it's easy to argue, they were overlooked. And, yeah, simple as that. McDonald's All-Americans who didn't work out as hoped for. And it's interesting because possibly the next pod or sometime near, I mean, going over certain types of positions and roles on the court, it sticks out. I won't, I'll just start reading some names. It'll stick out in terms of what type of player has a greater chance of not working out under Coach K, or at least under the Duke program. So we got Martin Nesley, Greg Kubek, Crawford Palmer, Joey Beard, Ricky Price, Taman Domzalski, Casey Sanders, Shavlik Randolph, Michael Thompson, Eric Boateng, and Chase Jeter. I would think that stands out. I mean, yeah, it's obviously the front court guys, so I'm gonna go into that more in a future pod, hopefully before the season, and try to kind of figure out what the deal is with that. I mean, even good, not great. McDonald's All-Americans. I mean, Al Abdul Nabi, he ended up having a really productive senior season. Before that, though, it was kind of up and down, mostly not great, but he even made the NBA, and he's had a successful run as I believe he calls games, or at least is in the media in some way. Chris Collins, Nate James, Marshall Plumlee. Marshall Plumlee's career at Duke, I would almost say he is somewhat comparable to Al Abdul Nabi in terms of showed flashes at times, and then the senior season kind of put it all together as much as their skill set will allow. And then Marquise Bolden. So a lot of front court players there right there too. Let's see. I mean, McDonald's All-Americans, I keep saying take with a grain of salt, but in the same way, you look at the national championship teams, and there's going to be the majority of guys who were named McDonald's All-Americans because those are going to be the most talented ones, and it becomes more blatant as it gets more recent because, like I said, when they first started choosing, it was just harder. You don't get to see guys as much. So in 1991, it was pretty much a 7-man rotation in close games. So, I mean, the only two that weren't McDonald's All-Americans were Brian Davis and Thomas Hill. Two super talented guys. So, I don't know. You could even argue. I mean, I don't know how they did in high school, but seemed really talented right away. Brian Davis, he did take a couple years to develop. Thomas Hill, by his sophomore season, he was a born scorer. 1992, they only had a 6-man rotation and close games, but the breakdown was 3-3. So you got Brian Davis, Thomas Hill, and Antonio Lang. Antonio Lang, I did mention, made the parade All-American team, but 3 McDonald's All-Americans, 3 not. 2010, the main starting 5 were All-Americans. So was Mason Plumlee for spot minutes. Andre Dawkins reclassified, so he didn't have a chance. And Miles Plumlee, he was a no-go. I really think that 2010 team kind of hit the jackpot for that perfect middle ground of having a core group of guys who are great college players, but not really explosive enough to leave early and be potentially high picks in the draft. So that worked out. And then 2015, Semi Ojeleye, he announced he was transferring early on. So all 9 rotation players were McDonald's All-Americans. And then all 8 of them once Rashid Suleiman was dismissed. So, yeah, I mean, that was all of them. All right, so going to the RSCI now, the rankings. I mean, again, I don't mean to kind of beat a dead horse here, but when you hype up rankings so much in high school, there's so much talent difference in terms of who they're playing against. So, even if you look up the 2012 RSCI rankings, not only is it a pretty awful group of, an awful class, no disrespect to the guys, but didn't really work out great, at least at the top of the list. And you go down, it ends up basically with the possibility of saying, like, I actually saw like number 71 through 88 rankings could be just as good, if not better, than most of the top. So the RSCI, again, started in 1998, so there's been 22 years of RSCI rankings. And Duke, they have been at or near the top most of those years. But because it worked out so well with the 99 class, those three guys, Boozer, Dunleavy, and Jay Will, staying 3 years, which is still shocking to me in a great way, they didn't have to immediately get new recruits. And then the 2002, same way. Well, that was JJ and Sheldon's class. So, in 1998, they were unranked because they just had Maggette, who was, I believe, number 16. And it kind of, you could see it would go up and down based on how they need recruits. 99, number 1, unranked, just Duhon. Unranked, just Ewing. 2002, they were number 1. 2003, unranked, just Deng. And then they did pretty well. 17-2, number 2, number 3, number 3. And then it got to where I talked about when they had a tough time. It's all relative. Duke having a tough time, they're still going to get a bunch of guys. But number 11 in 2008, number 8 in 2009, number 9 in 2010. So Capel comes, and it all changes. Number 2 in 2011. Then for 2012, you got to remember they had the 2012-2013 team, which was very upperclassmen oriented. I think Seth Curry, Mason Plumlee, Ryan Kelly, they were all seniors, so they didn't need a big class there. So that went down to number 10, and since then it's on. Number 4, number 1, number 1, number 2, number 2, number 1, and number 3. So they are just loading up every year. So they have had 72 top 100 RSCI recruits. That would be 34 in 13 years from 1998 through 2010, and 38 in 9 years from 2011 through 2019. So in a shorter period of time, they need more because, again, you got to keep reloading. Let's see, top 5 recruits, 16 total. Of those 16, 1998 through 2009, they had 3, Jay Will, Luol Deng, and Josh McRoberts. And then 2010 through 2019, in those 10 years, 13. Overall, top 10 recruits, 23. They had 8 from 98 through 2009, 15 from 2010 to 2019. Overall, top 20 recruits out of the 72, 43. And number 1 to 35, that would be 62. So of their 72 top 100 RSCI recruits, 62 of them were ranked number 1 through 35. The number 36 through 100, the 11 recruits, that would be Joey Baker, number 37, Eric Boateng, 39, Alex Murphy, 49, Marty Pocious, number 53, Jordan Tucker, 59, Jamal Boykin, number 60, Marshall Plumlee, 61, Oleg Chiz, 66, Alex O'Connell, 69, David McClure, 71, and number 81, Miles Plumlee. So of those 11, 5 transferred, Boateng, Murphy, Boykin, Tucker, and Chiz. 5 stayed, Miles Plumlee, Mason Plumlee, Pocious, O'Connell, and they haven't been concentrating too much on anything below 35, and there hasn't been too much production. I mean, they got some good stuff from the two Plumleys right there, and David McClure. He's one of my favorites, but yeah, I mean they are really they've been concentrating on the upper tier, as it's come to expect. So some unranked non-transfer recruits have made an impact. Lee Malchione, Tyler Thornton, Andre Dawkins, Jack White, possibly Jordan Goldwire, Nick Horvath, who hit a game-winning banker in '99 against DePaul as a freshman. Hashtag never forget. And then Reggie Love and Stan Brunson, both of whom I'll discuss among the Impact Walk-Ons. And I know there was plenty in the 80s, but like I said, it's just tough because I feel like the rankings it's tougher to find the rankings, and whoever made McDonald's, I think some of the guys that were left off just doesn't even make any sense. So I named some more of the recent ones. In terms of the RSCI, I have said that one of the most impressive things of Coach K's entire tenure, probably the most impressive, or at least the craziest, that in 35 seasons, 34 tournaments, because obviously he didn't make it in the 95 tournament, but when he has made the tournament, he's never been below a 2 seed twice in a row. That's, the more you think about that's absurd. So there is a 5-year period of recruiting that's kind of just as nuts, but in a different way. It's just kind of jaw-dropping. And I don't think we'll really begin to digest this until years from now, because it's just so absurd. I mean, we're so close to it still. But in 2014 to 2018, 5 years, 24 recruits. They had 11 recruits ranked in the top 7. Okafor, Bagley, Barrett, Giles, Reddish, Tatum, Ingram, Zion, DeVal, Tyus, and Wendell Carter. 7 recruits ranked 11 through 14. Bolden, Winslow, Thornton, Trey, Chase Jeter, Frank Jackson, and Gary Trent. 2 recruits ranked 21 through 24. That'd be Kennard and Grayson. 2 ranked 35 to 37. Delorier and Baker. And just 2 other top 100. That'd be Jordan Tucker and Alex O'Connell. So that's absurd. I mean, 11 recruits ranked in the top 7 just in that 5-year period of time. That's insane. And yeah, I mean, that's all there is to say about that. All right, so in terms of transfers, I'll give the overall. Then I was really interested in what happened to the transfers once they left Duke. So we'll go down that, because I think we kind of just, or some people forget about them, or we just assume they fail because they left Duke. But to each their own, and we'll see how it worked out. So
there's been 22 total transfers out.
In the 80s,
2.
1990s, there were 6. In the 2000s, 6. 2010s, 8. And I'm including Oleg Chiz in the 2010s with the 8. He announced in December 2009, but it makes more sense to put him in the 2010s. I'm also counting Sean Obi. I'm counting him in both in and out, because I guess it's just better to have it official, even though he really didn't have too much of an effect in or out. But, I mean, injuries suck, and he had to have that surgery. So, all right, let's look at guys that transferred. Starting off, Bill Jackman. He was in the first class. I think he might have actually been the first one to sign. I can't be positive, but not the first class, but the first big class, 1982. And he's from Nebraska, transferred back after his freshman year. He had a minor impact, really just took some time to develop until he started his senior year. and he had a respectable role in that Nebraska team, but never was a kind of a big time player. And he guys like that in 1982, unless they made the McDonald's team, I have no idea how good he was supposed to be. So it's really hard to say he lived up or didn't live up to anything because I don't know.
We also got Greg Wendt. He was from Detroit, and he was actually recruited the year before Bill Jackman. They both left after the 1983 season, which was obviously the freshman season of the big recruiting class. So kind of understandably, he was, I believe, named like Freshman of the Week one of his last weeks in the ACC. So he was coming on strong, but just couldn't get any playing time once that vaunted class of 1982 arrived. So he did transfer to Detroit, and he averaged 14 and 8 as a senior. So pretty good stats there.
Crawford Palmer, he was a McDonald's All-American. He was in the 1988 class. 1991, he transferred to Dartmouth after his junior year at Duke because he just had trouble cracking the lineup at Duke. So he did get a national championship while he was in Durham, but he averaged 17 a game at Dartmouth in his senior season. So while the quality of Dartmouth, I think that's Ivy League, right? Yeah, I think. It's not what it is now, current, because quality in basically every conference is really, really good now, and it wasn't quite that way in the late 80s, early 90s. But still, I mean, I think it worked out for him, 17 a game. Billy McCaffrey could have been one. He could have gone down in history at Duke. He was crazy good shooter, knocked down, huge for that 1991 championship, Coach K's first. But he wanted to kind of have the spotlight on himself. Transferred to Vanderbilt, averaged 21 a game both years he went there. So if that's what he wanted the spotlight on him, he got it, and he succeeded. So good for him. Christian Ast, from the 1990 class, transferred in 92 to American after a sophomore year at Duke, and he averaged 20 a game in his senior season at American. So you would have to say that worked out. Joey Beard, he was McDonald's All-American in the 93 class. He was the only McDonald's All-American in that class and didn't work out, and transferred to Boston after his freshman year at Duke. Very solid career. Averaged basically a double-double in all 3 years at Boston, or close to it. I mean, I think by his senior year is like averaging like 13 and I forget the exact rebounding number, but almost a double-double in all 3 years. So, again, when somebody is a McDonald's All-American, they come to Duke, you're hoping for big things, but he realized soon that it just wasn't going to happen like that, transferred to Boston, and had himself a solid career. Mike Chappell, I keep wanting to say Chappelle just because it feels more right, but part of the 1996 class, 98 transferred to Michigan State after sophomore year. He was starting for Duke during the early parts of his sophomore year, lost his starting spot, transferred to Michigan State, didn't really make much of an impact there, so that kind of fell apart for him. Chris Burgess, 97 class, Elton Brand overtook him. He really had trouble getting minutes at Duke. Transferred after sophomore year, solid at Utah, nothing special, but he was somebody who had big-time hype and never quite lived up to that. Andre Sweet, 2000 class, 2001, transferred to Seton Hall after his freshman year. I believe there was also an academic suspension, so that might have kind of pushed him out in terms of having a rough time being able to handle that at Duke. Although I don't know all the details, so don't quote me on that, but I believe there was some sort of academic issue. He was a solid role player. His biggest season came as a junior, averaging 10. Michael Thompson, number 30 recruit, McDonald's All-American in the 2002 class with JJ and Sheldon and Shavlik. 2003, transferred to Northwestern. Early in his sophomore year at Duke, he started his redshirt junior year strong. He was starting to look good, but was injured, and then just never could really get back on the court again. So injuries suck, man, especially for big men. Eric Boateng, 2005 class, 2006 transfer to Arizona State after his freshman year. He took a while to develop, and by his senior year, he averaged about 9 and 7, productive. But again, for McDonald's All-American, you would think there would have been a little more productivity, but so it is. Jamal Boykin, 2005 class, 2006 transfer to Cal early in his sophomore season. Mono actually set him back. He came down with a case of mono, so that had to have been frustrating, especially, I mean, you're coming from the West Coast and then you get sick, so you can't play, and it's got to be rough. So solid role player, especially during his last 2 seasons at Cal. Taylor King, 2007 class, 2008 transfer to Villanova after his freshman season, and then to Concordia. He had a rough go of it. There's really no getting around that. Elliot Williams, 2008 class, 2009 transfer to Memphis after his freshman season to be near his sick mom. Totally understandable. And, man, I still think the most shocking thing in season I've ever seen was the way Elliot Williams, he'd been playing like 5 minutes at most. I mean, he got a bunch of DNPs, and all of a sudden he's like starting and playing like 30 minutes a game and looking like a beast at Duke. And it's just, man, would have been fun to see him the next season. But he beasted out at Memphis, averaged 18. I think he was a first-round pick, and then he tore his ACL, and I think he tore it again. Unfortunate, but yeah, he was a beast. Oleg Chiz, 2008 class, December 2009 transfer to Nevada. Early in his sophomore season, he averaged 13 and then 14 in Nevada. Good score. I mean, you'd have to say that worked out. Michael Benajay, Silent G, 2011 class, 2012 transfer to Cuse. I wish K would have played him more. I mean, I was saying that at the time, but didn't happen. Went to Cuse, developed, and man, every year he got better. By his senior season, he was awesome. I mean, just really stuffed the stat sheet in every way, especially scoring. Ran the team, was the point guard, and fantastic college player. Alex Murphy, 2011 class, 2014 transfer to Florida. He redshirted as a freshman, so he transferred to Florida early in his redshirt sophomore year, then ended up at Northeastern. Wasn't able to be real productive at Duke, especially, I mean, not at all at Duke, and then didn't do much at Florida, but finished, I guess you could say, strong at Northeastern. Finished on a positive note there. Semi Ojeleye looked like the Incredible Hulk. Never got a chance to really show it at Duke. So 2013 class, 2015 transfer to SMU, Southern Methodist early in his sophomore season. He averaged 19 a game at SMU, you'd have to say. That worked out pretty well. And I think he's with the Celtics now. Not positive, but hopefully he can have a solid career in the NBA. Derek Thornton, 2015 class, 2016 transfer to USC after his freshman season, and now as a grad transfer, he is at BC, Boston College, so I look forward to seeing what he can do this season. That'll be interesting. Chase Jeter, 2015 class, 2017 transfer to Arizona after his sophomore year. He's made huge strides at Arizona, and he could have a great year now that, I mean, it's really the game has slowed down for him. He's actually catching the passes. The hands were an issue always at Duke. I mean, he was kind of thinking ahead to what he was going to do. It almost looked like that before he caught the ball all the time, because the footwork's always been elite. I was always really, really bold about his footwork. I compared it to Tim Duncan. I mean, I compare nothing else about his game to Tim Duncan, but the footwork has always been elite. There's been no question about that to me. Jordan Tucker, 2017 class, 2018 transfer to Butler early in his freshman year. He had an up and down season, but he definitely showed potential. Plus, I mean, he was 9 for 16 from 3 over his last 4 games in March. And I know a team that could have used that type of shooting last season in March, but I'm not naming any names of the school that could have used it, Duke. Sean Obi, as I mentioned before, technically 2013 class, transferred out from Rice after 2016. Then transferred to Maryland as a grad transfer. I mean, at Duke, he was plagued by a cartilage issue in his knee. He had surgery, and the doctors told him not to play for a year. So, graduated and went to Maryland as a grad transfer. I think he was kind of still injured there, so it's unfortunate.
So the transfers out, there's 22 total.
And, well, the 8 transfers out in the 2010s. I mean, especially, if you don't count Sean Obi, 7 compared to the 6 in each of the 2 previous decades. It seemed like it's not that big a deal. It's not much more. But if you look closer, 2006 to 2018, you got 12 transfers out in 13 years. That's counting Sean Obi. So 11 in 13 years, not counting Sean Obi. 12 and 13 counting him. So, yeah, it added up during that time. The transfers into Duke total in the 80s, 0, 90s, 1, 2000s, 1, and 2010s, 3. Again, counting Sean Obi. So you got in the 90s, the first, Rashawn McLeod. Man, I love the impact he had. Came from St. John's, just a beast. An absolute beast. 2000s, the one was Dante Jones, another one of my favorites. 2010s, Seth Curry and Rodney Hood. I mean, I don't think it could. I mean, besides Sean Obi, the other 4 couldn't have worked out better, in my opinion. So then you got the not so fun category of dismissed, and I can't say for sure this was dismissed, but Tony Moore, he was part of the 1992 class, and he was suspended after 7 games of the 95-96 season. I mean, he hadn't really done much in his first 3 seasons at all, but he did start 5 of the 7 games, the first 7 games of that season, and averaged 25 minutes so far in his senior year. So he was off to a promising start there. But I believe it was academic issues, and unfortunately never got it kind of worked out. So it was tough. I mean, you combine that with Trajan Langdon. He had to take a medical redshirt with a knee issue early in the year. And I think that was the season when Chris Collins forgot how to shoot. So that was a rough one. That was definitely a rough one. The other is Rashid Suleiman. I mean, Rashid was I love that guy, and he was actually one of the, I believe it's 12 non-one and dones to average double-digit points in his freshman season. There's not too many who've done that, and I mean, he showed tons of potential. I think just the switching off and on, starting, coming off the bench, it's just kind of, I don't know if it messed with his head. I don't know what the deal was, but it's unfortunate. Hopefully he is doing well. Talented dude. All right, Redshirts. And again, there's always going to be the possibility that, as I said at the start of this kind of bonus edition of the pod, there's nothing that has official numbers and details and facts on all of this. So it's basically me just pouring through every season to try to find all this. So the next category of redshirts, that is one I can almost guarantee I missed some. I guarantee I missed some, especially like the freshmen. I don't know, but I do the best I can. So, all right, we got. I'm doing this chronologically. Kenny Blakeney, 91, freshman. Trajan Langdon, as I mentioned, 96. That would be his sophomore medical. Nate James, sophomore, 1998. I think that was. I know one year he had a thumb issue. I believe 98. That was, he sprained his ankle. That was a high sprain. and he only played like 6 games, so he got a medical redshirt from there, which worked out very well, especially during his redshirt senior year, which was the 2001 championship season. We got Nick Horvath, who redshirted his freshman season. Alex Murphy, as I mentioned, redshirted as a freshman. Andre Dawkins, 2013 as a senior for his family. Still, man, it was such a rough season as a freshman. He reclassified, and then if you don't know the story about his sister, just look it up. It's really sad. Marshall Plumlee, 2012 freshman, and Emil Jefferson, 2016 as a senior, medical redshirt. Reclassified, I think I've mentioned all these: Alex Murphy, Derek Thornton, Marvin Bagley, and Joey Baker. Freshman double-digit scores. We got 83 Johnny Dawkins and Mark Allery ready to go right away. Then it was almost a decade until the next. Grant Hill, 95. Grant Hill was 91. 95 was Trajan Langdon. 98 Elton Brand. Number 99 Corey Maggette. 2000 you got J. Will and Boozer. 2003 J.J. Redick. 2004 Luol Deng. 2007 John Shire. 2008 Kyle Singler. Then I got 2009. This is, I guess, kind of in quotes. I'm not sure if it should count, but Kyrie Irving, because I'm still not quite sure if that season happened. 2012, you got Austin Rivers. 2013, Rashid Solomon. 2014, Jabari Parker. And then it's kind of flooded. I mean, Jahlil Okafor, Winslow, Tyus, Brandon Ingram, Luke Kennard, Jason Tatum, Frank Jackson, Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter, Gary Trent, Trevon Duval, R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, and Cam Reddish. All right, next category, one and dones. You got Corey Maggette, Luol Deng, Kyrie Irving, Austin Rivers, Jabari Parker, and then the flood comes. Big Ja, Tyus Jones, Winslow, Ingram, Tatum, Giles, Frank Jackson, Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter, Trent Duval, R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, and Cam Reddish. So you got 19 total. From K's first season, the 81 season, to 2010, you got a grand total of 0. Wait, that can't be true, because you got Maggette in 99 and Luol Deng in 2004. All right, so from that, I think I meant to put 2000. From 98, from 81 to 2000. Was 0. No, that still wouldn't work. All right, 81 to 1998. Yeah, that's going to be the one that worked, because Corey Maggette was first in 99. So 81 to 98, I apologize, is 0. From 99 to 2010 is 2. 2011 to 2014 is 3. And then 2015 to 2019 is 14, including 10 in the last 3 seasons. 2 and dones. You got 4 total. 2 in the 90s, 1 in the 2000s, 1 in the 2010s. Let's see, in the 90s, you got same season. In 1999, you got Elton Brand and Will Avery. In the 2000s, you got Josh McRoberts. And in the 2010s, Luke Kennard. 3 and dones. 6 total. 5 in the 2000s, 1 in the 2010s. You got Jay Will, Carlos Boozer, and Dunleavy all from the same class. You got Shavlik Randolph, Gerald Henderson, and then just recently Marquise Bolden. Honestly, I'm not even sure where to put Rodney Hood. He's somewhere in the middle of all that because he played the year at Mississippi State. He's obviously sat out his transfer year at Duke and then played 1 season. So I don't know if you want to call it 1 and done, or 2 and done, or 3 and done. Whatever you want. All right. Here's an interesting category: geography. We got the West Coast, or very near the West Coast. In the 1980s, you got Bill Jackman from Nebraska. Jay Bryan, I don't feel like I should have counted him, to be honest. No disrespect. But it didn't seem, I mean, he played like a little bit in his freshman season, but really didn't have much of an impact at all. I'm trying to keep this to guys who at least had some sort of impact, but either way, he's from Colorado. Mark Allery from Arizona, Jay Billis from California, and Quinn Snyder from Washington. So right away, he was getting impact players on the West Coast, and it worked out. 90s, you got Cherokee Parks from Cali, Eric Meek, California, Ricky Price, California, Taman Domzalski, New Mexico, Chris Burgess, California, and Mike Dunleavy, Oregon. And this is just where I list that their hometown. So it's always a possibility that, yeah, I'm sure they played high school in different places, but this is where I list their hometown. All right, so I'm not even sure. Maybe I realized it and I just forgot, but Mike Dunleavy, Oregon. That was interesting. I didn't realize he was from Oregon. 2000s, Sheldon Williams, Oklahoma. I also didn't realize that. DeMarcus Nelson, California. Jamal Boykin, California. Kyle Singler, Oregon. So Singler and Dunleavy, Oregon buddies. Taylor King, California. And Oleg Chiz, Nevada. 2010s, Derek Thornton, California. Chase Jeter, Nevada. Frank Jackson, Utah. Marvin Bagley, Arizona. And most recently, Cassius Stanley from California. All right, we got Alaska. And technically, Alaska is considered west, but I'm counting it on its own. And that, I'm sure most know, Trajan Langdon and Carlos Boozer. Foreign/overseas. Canada. K's first recruit that actually had an impact, Dan Meager. And then you got Greg Newton and RJ Barrett. Again, like I mentioned, RJ, he played high school in Florida, but I don't think anyone would doubt his tried and true affiliation with Canada. England, Eric Boateng, though he played high school in Delaware. Luol Deng, though he played high school in New Jersey. Lithuania, Marty Pocius, though he played high school in New Hampshire. Nigeria, Sean Obi, though he played high school in Connecticut. Australia, Jack White, he did play. He actually did play high school in Australia. And then, obviously, no doubt at all, 100%, Kyrie Irving, because he is an official Aussie. Yep, that's right. All right, and so, it worked out pretty well from the West Coast at first. The first, Bill Jackman, he was the first one he transferred, so that didn't. But after that, most stayed, and it worked out really well. Chris Burgess, he left, but I think overall it was great up until in the 2000s, Sheldon Williams and DeMarcus Nelson worked out. But then you got Jamal Boykin and Taylor King and Oleg Chiz and Derek Thornton and Chase Jeter. So, and that was during a span when Kyle Singler did work out, but 5 out of 6 recruits from the West Coast did not. So, wasn't going too well, but Frank Jackson and Marvin Bagley have turned it around. It really does seem to come down to just immediate playing time, because you're not going to get homesick if you're getting minutes, and it gives you something to look forward to. And it was kind of the opposite with Chris Burgess. Chris Burgess did start with minutes, and then those minutes dropped drastically because of someone named Elton Brand, and he left. But the other ones, it's really the ones who transferred, they weren't on the court, or Derek Thornton, there were some issues besides that, but yeah, the West Coast wasn't going too well for a while, so hopefully now, Cassius Stanley, he might not be a one and done, so we'll see how it goes for him. Hopefully it does work out. All right, we got some family connections now. All 17 Plumbleys, because I believe there are 17 of them. We got Tyus and Trey Jones. We got now we're mixing legit playing time and walk-ons. We got Ryan and his brother Sean Kelly. We got 2 walk-ons. We got Joe and Nick Paliuka. We got 2 other walk-ons, Jordan and Patrick Davidson. And then also kind of a interesting one. Lee Malchione, his father Gary, played for Duke, though not Coach K, but a fun family thing there. Here's something. Most surprising non-scholarship player at Duke. Trajan Langdon. Did you realize that? Because he was actually an official walk-on. The San Diego Padres paid his cost at Duke in exchange for him agreeing to spend a set amount of days each summer in their minor league system playing baseball. I think the agreement was for like 4 years, and with the red shirt, he was there for 5, so I don't know if he had to pay 1 year himself or Duke gave him a scholarship for 1 year. But for 4 years, he was an official walk-on at Duke, and I think I don't think many people realize that. All right, intriguing walk-ons. Reggie Love, he was a wide receiver for Duke football, and he also walked on to the basketball team. So when he graduated from Duke, he tried out for the Packers. He was cut. And hey, he came back for a graduate senior season and provided a big boost. While Carlos Boozer was recovering from an ankle injury, he made an impact. And then he became besties with Barack Obama, which was pretty cool. All right, D. Bryant. He was a reserve on the 98-99 team. And then after that, that was during his freshman season. For his sophomore and junior year, he was the quarterback for Duke football. Duke's record in those 2 years, not good. They were 0-22 during those 2 years, and he ended up transferring because of academics, but still an interesting story. Jay Heaps, he doubled as a reserve on the basketball team and a star on the soccer team. All 4 years at Duke, from 96 to 99. And then after Duke, he played for the MLS and the U.S. national team. So, really cool. And then my guy, the legend, Stan Brunson. Stan Brunson. He is a legend in my heart. You want to know why? All right, well, first, he was another scholarship soccer player like Jay Heaps, who found a spot on the roster when Antonio Lang got injured, and then overcame a pretty brutal knee injury the next year, required 2 surgeries. But, okay, here it is. The last 11 games of his career, 153 minutes of playing time, including 22 in his last game versus Eastern Michigan. Unfortunately, Duke lost that. That was the 1995-96 season. But before that, in every other game he played combined, total playing time, 55 minutes. It's amazing. Again, the last 11 games of his career, 153 minutes, including 22 in his last. Before that, 55 total. Stan Brunson, walk-on, legend. All right, Baker Perry, he was another walk-on during the 90s rebuild, and he wrote a pretty cool, a nice article giving Coach K respect just before K won his 1,000th game in 2015. Just Google Baker Perry Coach K tribute. I enjoyed it. All right, so we got, in honor of me, we got lefties, southpaws. And this is another one where I'm sure I forgot someone. So, who knows? All right, we got Johnny Dawkins. We got Thomas Hill, Lee Malchione, Josh McRoberts, Taylor King, Elliott Williams, Rodney Hood, Justice Winslow. And Luke Kennard is officially right-handed, but shoots left. Marvin Bagley, R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, Vernon Carey, and I'm pretty sure the great Todd Zafirovsky is left-handed also. All right, so here's a subject where I know some people just flip out and lose their mind anytime anything having to do with race is mentioned. This is just literally related to basketball. Not going anywhere else with this, but if you freak out just because of the topic, I will steal a line from Old School and say earmuffs. There's really, I don't know how else to put that. Maybe fast forward a couple minutes, but I just think this is interesting. Has nothing to do with anything else. It's interesting. So I mentioned the racial breakdown before for the different eras. I have more specific numbers now. So let's see here. All right. McDonald's All-Americans starting out in 1982 to 1986. 4 black, 3 white. For 1987 and 1993. 8 white, 1 black. The notable guys in that were Leitner, Hurley, and Grant Hill. Grant Hill was the one black guy during that time period. 94 to 95, it was 2 each. And then the numbers drastically changed. From 1996 to 2004, 13 black and 4 white. Chris Burgess, Mike Dunleavy, J.J. Redick, and Shavlik Randolph were the 4. And if you count Rashawn McLeod, who was a McDonald's All-American, it becomes 14 to 4. Keep in mind Chris Carrawell and Sheldon Williams were injured, or they definitely would have made it. So basically 16 to 4. And a lot of that had to do with Johnny Dawkins coming in. I would assume. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but you would think something definitely changed for it to change, the number to change that drastically. I mean, the first different type of class was 1996 with Chris Carrawell, Nate James, and Mike Chappell. But and also Rashawn McLeod was he was sitting the year before and then starting in 1996-97. So it was a little before Johnny Dawkins came, but he had a big hand in, I think, changing the culture a little bit in terms of at least during that period of time. But some of those guys did leave early, and some of the recruits, as I said, casting not a wide net. When you're going for very specific guys, if you don't get them, there's not much of a backup plan. So it did cost Coach K at times later in those years, closer to 2004 than 1996. So it was interesting how I talked about this with Joe in terms of maybe he wanted the continuity. I can't say that for sure. But from 2005 to 2009, switch back. 6 white, 5 black. The main guys, Shire, Singler, Nolan Smith, to a lesser extent, or not lesser, but he left after 3 years. Gerald Henderson. Or no, that is a lesser extent because Gerald Henderson's athleticism gave him NBA upside. They hit the perfect middle ground of not being really dominant enough to leave early, but still terrific, great college players who improved during their time. Everyone says, oh, if you stay, you'll improve. There's lots of guys who stay 4 years, but they're limited. They're just limited in what they can do, their productivity. Shire, Singler, and Nolan Smith, they improved through 4 years. Not everyone can do that. So while you can say, oh, they stayed, that's what the difference was. There's other guys who stayed, weren't quite the same. So, I mean, it is what it is. And then 2010 to 2019, that's when, with the new era, 24 black and 4 white McDonald's All-Americans. The 4 white guys have been Kennard, Luke Kennard, Grayson Allen, Matthew Hurt, and somehow Marshall Plumlee, despite being ranked just 61. And again, remember, Derek Thornton and Marvin Bagley reclassified, and Harry Giles was injured. Otherwise, they definitely would have made it to make the number 27 to 4 and 25 to 3 from 2010 to 2018. So there was a big difference in terms of that. All right, so let's go through the RSCI Top 100, the differential there, the split. From 1998 through 2004, 12 black and 3 white. The 3 white guys, Dunleavy, Redick, and Shavlik. Dunleavy's 26, Redick 11, and Shavlik Randolph 14. 2005 to 2009, 6 black and 11 white. So, switched around. Black, Boateng, Boykin, Gerald Henderson, Lance Thomas, Nolan Smith, Elliot Williams. The white guys, McRoberts, Paulus, Marty Pocious, Brian Zubek, John Shire, Kyle Singler, Taylor King, Oleg Chiz, Miles Plumlee, Ryan Kelly, and Mason Plumlee. 2010 to 2019, the guys in the RSCI Top 100. There's 7 white and 33 black. So, of the 72 top 100 ranked Duke recruits so far in the 22 years of RSCI rankings, there has been 51 black recruits and 21 white recruits, with 11 of those white recruits coming during a 5-year period of time from 2005 to 2009, and 7 of them being among the 11 total top 100 recruits ranked number 36 through 100, so the lower half. So surprisingly, I mean, Matthew Hurt at number 12, he is Duke's first top 20 white recruit in a decade, top 100 white recruit in a decade, since 2009 when Duke signed number 14 Ryan Kelly and number 18 Mason Plumlee. Before Matthew Hurt, Duke's 7 white top 100 recruits during the RSCI era were all the lowest in that Duke class. Though this also gives a good portrayal of just how crazy Duke's recruiting classes have been, especially starting in 2014. I mean, Luke Kennard at number 21 and Grayson Allen at number 24. I think many teams would love to have guys in that number as their top recruit. I mean, even Joey Baker at number 37. There was also Alex Murphy at 49, Marshall Plumlee at 61, and Alex O'Connell at number 69. Nice. Transfers out. Let's look at the split there. 1981 through 1995, 6, they're all white. This was an era when basically hardly anyone transferred or left early. I mean, consider these numbers for a second. 27.6 points per game, 14.7 rebounds, 5 blocks at a Power 5 conference school. That player came back. Yep. Those were Shaquille O'Neal's stats at LSU in his 1991 sophomore year, and he came back for his junior season. I mean, that just goes to show you it was a different time. I would probably say Shaq, Michael Jordan, and Jay Williams coming back for their junior seasons are the biggest standouts to me in terms of coming back when the draft stock just couldn't be any higher. That rarely works out even close to those 3 for players projected high lotto who return to school. We got 1996 to 1999. There were 2 transfers out, split, 1 white, 1 black. 2000 to 2006, 4 all black. 2007 to 2012, 5, 3 white, 2 black. 2013 to 2019, 5 all black. Transfers in, 5. They have been all black: McLeod, Dante, Hood, Curry, and Obi. So again, I'm not trying to create a narrative here. I'm just giving the list, the information, but I think it does tell a story without even trying. I mean, without being biased in any way, I don't think it's a bold statement to make to say black players are generally better than white players, although college, it evens out the playing field a little more because college can be more system oriented. But I mean, you look at the NBA, I mean, you'd have to be blind not to notice the difference. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. So when Duke's had, after that first kind of decade for Coach K at Duke, when they've had their best teams, it has generally been when they've gotten more black players, the more athletic kind of guys who you would expect to have a better shot to do well in the NBA, guys who can create their own shot and just get buckets. So I think it does make a difference. So when you talk about Duke's reputation and what other recruits might be thinking in terms of should I choose Duke, should I not choose Duke, during the early times, when people say Duke, hey, they're a bunch of white guys, I mean, it is what it is. The numbers do show that a lot of their players were white. A lot of the players who got the limelight, the attention, they were white. So, I mean, there is something to it. And then you look at players who Duke was known as when you got to the NBA, you wouldn't have a great career, so it's more system. And unfortunately, that was true. During those two chunk classes in 1998, or I'm sorry, 1997, 1999, and then 2002. Those guys, some of them had success in the NBA, more in 1997 and 1999. But even so, it didn't make too much of a difference. There was random guys at different times, like Luol Deng. But I would say, to repeat something I said before, Jabari Parker really opened everything up more than, I believe, in my opinion, Kyrie Irving and Austin Rivers did. Because once that happened, it's just the culture at Duke changed. And it's not a culture that wants more black guys over white guys. It's not even close to that. It's just talent is talent. We don't care who you are, what you look like. We're just going to get the talented guys. We're going to get guys who hopefully have chemistry together and help them reach their potential at Duke and then further on with their career in the NBA. So, again, I know some people just don't like even admitting that there is a race to these players. And let's be honest. I think it is natural for many to root for and identify more in terms of players that look like themselves. So, whatever you are listening to this, it might have happened, might not with you. But, that's why a guy like J.J. Redick, I think so many, he was so divisive because, hey, he looks just like this guy who might be your neighbor to some, and he's dominating out there. So it's just, it made people feel something. I'll say that. And it's just, I think now the reputation is everyone's just looking for that white guy at Duke. I've even heard like Joey Baker, he's going to be the next hated white guy at Duke. It's like, why? Like, he's never said anything, never shown anything. I think Grayson Allen didn't help matters with some of his off-court antics, but even so, it's tough when Christian Laettner kind of started that whole thing, and then J.J. Redick, I would say he suffered for it he kind of suffered for what Christian Laettner started, but J.J. Redick didn't do anything to kind of tone it down. So, yeah, that kind of started a trend, but after that, it hasn't been these annoying white guys at Duke like some would have you think. But there is something to that reputation. You got to see both sides of it, look at the perspective as a whole, taking a step back. All right, so the last thing, assistant coaches. These are, again, a lot of, like, Coach K started off with the Army guys, the West Point guys, and I probably should have looked a little harder. Starting off his career, I couldn't find the whole coaching staff, so I have 80-81, Chuck Swenson, Bobby Dwyer, and same thing for his second season. Both of those guys came from West Point. Then next we have Swenson, Dwyer, Gaudet, and Bob Bender. So after that, Dwyer leaves. So you got Swenson, Gaudet, and Bender for the next 2 years. After that, for the 86 season, you had Tom Rogers. Then Tom Rogers leaves. You got Mike Bray. So you got Swenson, Gaudet, Bender, and Mike Bray. The next season is the first season where you add that ex-Duke player for the first time. So you got Gaudet, Bender, Bray, Tommy Amaker, and then also one of his ex-players at Army, Scott Easton, as a volunteer assistant. And Scott Easton allows me to read a really cool story, or not cool because it sounds pretty awful when you say it that way, but something that really made an impact. Is from the Winston-Salem Journal. And they're talking to Scott Easton, and I will just read straight from the article. Easton said things didn't always go right during his 4 years at Army. He played under Coach K at Army. Easton said things didn't always go right during his 4 years at Army, But he said he learned so much from Krzyzewski that didn't sink in until after he left school. Easton's most lasting memory, he said, was the way Krzyzewski went above and beyond the call of duty for his players. In Easton's senior year in December of 1978, he had missed 2 free throws late in a game that ended up costing Army the game. On that same night, Easton's brother, Tim, was killed in a car accident. Coach K was the person who told me that Timmy had been killed, Easton recalled. He came down the hallway to see me, and I thought we were going to discuss the missed free throws, but he had to break the news to me. Krzyzewski's only concern was Easton and his family. During the funeral procession for Timmy, I didn't want to be in the car, so I walked close by, and Coach K was right there beside me, giving me support, Easton said. His presence in my life during that situation, and what I had to go through, is something I will never forget. Nearly 10 years later, Easton had caught the coaching bug. After doing his tour of duty with the Army after graduation, Easton was given a shot to help that Duke team in 1987-88. Easton was a volunteer assistant at age 31, thanks to his former coach at Army. So, it just goes to show in terms of the impact that Coach K can make, and you hear constantly about what's officially reported, but some of these stories that you might not know. I mean, that's pretty deep. That's an impact right there. All right, so he was a volunteer assistant for that season. Then you got Jay Billis joining the next year. So you got Gaudet, Bender, Bray, Amaker, and Billis. Then Bender drops out. So for the next 3 years, it's 4 guys: Gaudet, Bray, Amaker, and Billis. For the 1992-93 season, you drop who? Let's see. You drop Billis. Then Quinn Snyder joins. So replace X-player for X-player. Then, it's the same thing for the next season. You add Tim O'Toole the season after. But that is the 94-95 season when K, he misses it after, I believe, 13 games. Gaudet takes over. Things didn't do well. And Gaudet, unfortunately, he is out after that season. So is Bray. And it ends up Amaker, Quinn Snyder, Tim O'Toole, and David Henderson. So that's when you have 3 out of the 4 guys are now ex-Duke players. And then Johnny Dawkins joins in 1998 after the same 4 coaches the season after. So you have Johnny Dawkins, David Henderson, Quinn Snyder in the 98-99 season. 99-2000, you have Henderson, Dawkins, and Steve Wojo. And then 2000 to 2001 through 2007-2008, you have the same staff the whole time: Dawkins, Chris Collins, and Wojo. So it was great to get that consistency. 2008-2009, you got Collins, Wojo, and then Nate James. So there's a difference there. I think Nate James might have been there before. He might have been like a strength and conditioning coach. I mean, sometimes you have these guys who they're not official coaches, but they are on the staff, and it's kind of thought of in the same way. Say for the 2010 season, Collins, Wojo, and James. 2011, Capel, Collins, Wojo, and James. So Capel joins for the 2010-2011 season. 2013, you got Capel, Collins, Wojo, and James. 2014, Capel, Wojo, and James. 2015, Capel, James. Then John Shire joins. 2016, same thing. 2017, Nolan Smith joins. And I think Nolan Smith technically is called the director of basketball operations, but I mean he's still there. It still counts. And then when Capel leaves for Pittsburgh after the 2018 season, as we have currently, it is Nate James, John Shire, Nolan Smith, and Chris Carrawell. So that pretty much sums up kind of the deeper of the deep dive, the bonus stuff where you got real into it. Some of it is kind of listing off, but it just gives good context as to really what is going on, all the factors. Again, I mean, like the rankings / McDonald's All-Americans, the type of error and the continuity, the assistant coaches, the recruiting strategy, the transfers, the redshirts, the unexpected. I mean, the program reputation, what it's known for, and simply put, whether guys work out or not, it all has an effect. So while I've always been and will always remain the type to, I like the basketball part of it. I'm not into recruiting. I love scouting. I mean, that's why I love the NBA draft and everything that goes into it and the way I can project prospects. But it's not the same thing for the way that recruiting is covered. Recruiting is covered basically like a soap opera and drama and gossip, and I'm not into that. Some people are. More power to them. I stay away from all that, but it is interesting just to look at how everything's changed and just Duke recruiting as a whole since Coach K has arrived there. And I mentioned with Joe, I think the rule is going to change in 2022 with players able to go straight pro again, so we'll see how that works out. And as Coach K kind of reaches what will, I mean, you'd like to think he's everlasting at Duke, will coach forever, but the twilight of his coaching career, you would assume, is coming very soon. We'll see how the recruiting strategy changes, if it does at all, as we get to that 2022 year and it nears, because, I mean, it's almost here already. All right, so that sums up everything for recruiting. If you have any questions or want to know any of the information again, just email dukebasketballcorner@gmail.com. I will respond. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. This part was for the absolute kind of devoted to just information type of fans. And whoever you are, thanks so much for listening. I will be back soon with another Duke Basketball Corner podcast as the season nears. It'll be here before we even know it. I'm Adam Comro, and this has been Duke Basketball Corner.